History of Kenmare Church of the Nazarene, composed by Layne and Beth O'Neill. Initial contact with the Church of the Nazarene in Kenmare was made in the summer of 1913, when services were held in the Danish Brotherhood Hall with Reverend and Mrs. Brins. It wasn't until the fall of 1931 when another service was held. Reverend Harry Sorensen, then pastor at the Norma Nazarene Church, conducted special meetings in a store building. The Kenmare First Church of the Nazarene had its actual beginning in the summer of 1946. Reverend Ernest Coriel held a tent meeting where the swimming pool is now located. In the fall of 1947, Reverend and Mrs. Ben Ali came to Kenmare. Services were officially begun on December 27, 1947, in the Gardner residence, which is now part of the Jim Hillstead property. Before the Alis arrived, Reverend Carl Coyle, pastor of the Norma Nazarene Church, purchased 3 lots on the corner of 4th Street Northeast and 2nd Avenue Northeast from Merle Kleinsmith. The parsonage still remains on this land. In July 1949, excavation began for a basement church. Construction of the church was supervised by Louis Redding of Minot and Reverend Ben Ali. Opening services were conducted in September of 1949. On May 28, 1950, the church was officially organized by the district superintendent, Harry F. Taplin. There were 7 charter members: Mrs. Marie Overton, Mrs. Catherine Peterson, Mr. and Mrs. John Jacobs, Reverend Harry Taplin, and Reverend and Mrs. Ali. All charter members are now deceased. Reverend and Mrs. Ali resigned in the fall of 1950 and resided in Napa, Idaho at the time of their deaths in 1990 and 2000. In March of 1951, Reverend Lester Miller took over the pastorate until January of 1952, when Reverend Ellen Doak and Miss Virginia Ogden, now Mrs. Clifford Peterson, arrived. Under Reverend Doak's supervision, construction of the upstairs of the church began in May of 1956. The first service in the upstairs auditorium was held December 20th, 1959. The church was dedicated May 15th, 1960. Reverend Doak continued to pastor the church until 1974. She also did most of the work on a 4-bedroom parsonage to complement the church. Reverend R. John Wolfe arrived in August of 1974 and pastored until July of 1976. At that time, Reverend Tom and Debbie Harvey and family took over the pastorate and remained until September 1979. Reverend William and Bobby Patton and family pastored from September 1979 until May 1984. In June 1984, Reverend Lawrence, Larry, and Stephanie Gill and family began the pastorate in Kenmare. In September of 1989, they resigned to take a pastorate in Michigan. Reverend Bob and Sandy Humphrey and family arrived in December of 1989 and led the congregation until January 1992, when they moved to Olathe, Kansas to take a position at Mid-America Nazarene University. Reverend Larry Gill made the initial contact to purchase Laura's Lanes, a former bowling alley, to become the new Church of the Nazarene. It wasn't until 1990, when Reverend Bob Humphrey was pastor, that the actual purchase was completed. After many willing hands doing the remodeling, the church made the march to the new building in September of 1990. Classrooms were added on the north side, which originally housed the arcade. A sanctuary and fellowship hall was constructed on the east end of the lanes and where the restaurant was. The apartment at the east end of the alley became a pastor's study, Sunday school office, and church office. A storage area on the west end of the building became the teen room. The area where the actual lanes were is used as a storage area with plans to be converted to a new sanctuary. This church building was dedicated on October 21, 1990, and services have continued to be held in the present building. Reverend Larry and Cindy Cox and Trevor followed in February of 1992 and pastored until September of 1998, and then they moved to Perrytown, Texas. Reverend Ron and Melva Newton blew into Kenmare in December of 1989 and led the congregation until 2005 when they moved to Arkansas. Pastor Doug West, Priscilla, and their children arrived in Kenmare on a cold December day in 2005. They led the church until August 2012, when they moved to a pastored church in Larimore, North Dakota. Pastor Jairus Chulik and her husband Neil came in May of 2014 and pastored until June of 2016. They moved to Louisville, Kentucky to continue their ministry. July 2017, Pastor Brad Griffin, Kristen, Mass, and Zachary came to be the pastoral family and are presently leading the congregation. Throughout the last 70 years, Kenmare Church of the Nazarene has been a beacon of light in our community. It is the prayer of each member and friend that this church will continue to be a lighthouse in Kenmare and the surrounding communities.